here with Elysse Grossi-Soyster, who is a researcher at Stanford Medicine. Elysse wears many hats in the lab and is going to talk a little bit more about some of the research that she presented. She co-chaired a session this morning titled Virology and Other Diseases. Other viruses. And is going to talk a little bit more about the research that she presented. So can you give us a little background on what the aim of your study was, looking at Rift Valley fever virus prevalence in Western Kenya?
Yeah, so we looked at a particular region of Western Kenya and compared two different populations to see if Rift Valley is being transmitted at a higher rate in these two populations when compared. So community members, people who just live in the community who don't necessarily work slaughtering animals, and then people who work in a slaughterhouse and really slaughter animals on a regular basis.
Okay, and so you're looking at these communities because Rift Valley fever virus is transmitted through animals to humans most of the time. Could you talk a little bit more about what the typical transmission of Rift Valley fever virus?
Yeah,
it's a long one. Yeah,
so,
RVFV.
So Rift is generally transmitted. It can be transmitted by mosquito. That's mainly how the animals get it, and then we're finding that humans can get it through mosquito bite as well, but they can also really get transmitted through be exposed through direct contact with fluids.
Okay.
So
and so where are some of the locations or regions where Rift Valley fever virus is actually prevalent and is a potential threat?
So the first outbreak was in the 1950s in Rift Valley in Africa, and then it primarily stayed in sub-Saharan Africa for a long time until about the last decade, where we saw it moving throughout Africa and then off of the African continent into Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And right now it's just in those areas, but we don't know where it's going to spread next.
Okay. Well, and you mentioned something in your presentation today about how there could be potential risk even in the U.S. And that the risk could increase around things like there being a lot of rainfall with an El Nino year. Could you talk a little bit more about that and what is the risk to the U.S. and other countries outside of where Rift Valley fever virus is currently prevalent?
Yeah, so any arbovirus, so that's a virus that's spread by mosquitoes, any type of arbovirus really depends on the climate because mosquitoes are very finicky and they like to live in particular environments. So they love water. Anytime there's flooding, they lay their eggs in the water. So any heavy rainfall that causes flooding obviously causes more mosquitoes, and that increases your risk for disease transmission. That's a big deal for the U.S. because in Rift Valley fever virus, you have a lot of major effects on animals. So with the U.S.'s huge livestock industry, which we depend on for dairy, meat, lots of different things, if they were to have an epidemic in the U.S., then it would really devastate our economy, and it would be pretty terrible.
Yeah. Well, that is a little alarming. And so going back to the research that you presented today, could you talk a little bit more about the difference in prevalence that you found between these two groups, between community workers or community members and slaughterhouse workers?
Yeah, so what we were expecting to find was that previous studies really hadn't found any rift in this area.
Okay.
And what we found is, yes, there is rift in the area, and that community members have a lower seroprevalence compared to the slaughterhouse workers. And it was about a 3 times difference.
Wow, it's pretty significant. And so what do you expect that these results now, what is the impact of these results going forward in thinking about protection, or how do we deal with this now that we know that there's a difference in prevalence between these two groups?
So the big difference is, even though the community members are at a lower risk, there is still a risk because we are seeing positives in that community. So really the biggest information is now we know that it's not just mosquitoes. It is really heavily dependent on contact with animals, and what types of animals, and your hygienic practices around that. And then also there's an education factor there that we can rely on. Now that we've identified some of the potential risks, we can really hopefully educate some people and encourage them to be more mindful about the diseases that they're being exposed to through their occupation or their lifestyle habits.
Great. Very cool. Well, my very last question for you is a little bit more of a fun question. So here we are at ASTMH, and we're surrounded by tropical medicine experts. It's a very exciting place to be. And so I wanted to ask you what inspires you the most about working in tropical medicine?
My favorite thing about tropical medicine, whether it's viruses, parasites, bacteria, anything, it just fascinates me that we are pretty complex multicellular organisms that have evolved to be very robust and to withstand a lot of stuff. But these microscopic things can just take us down without, with very little effort. And I just find that so fascinating and terrifying and, intriguing. So I semi-worship them in a way for, their ability to just break everything down.
Yeah, it's a very good point and a little also very scary. Well, thank you very much for talking with me, Elysse. I really appreciate it. And we'll be, stay tuned for more videos from ASTMH 2015. Thanks.
Copyright Stanford University, all rights reserved.